Good afternoon, everyone. It's that time of day again. It's Wednesday. It's 12:30. Welcome to Lancat HomeGames. I can see tons of you are joining in already on the live chat today. We have live with us today the seventh most attractive financial planner in the UK, Mr. Darren Cooke from Red Circle Financial Planning. Yeah, the number 7th.
That says a lot about the attractiveness of financial planners in general. If I'm 7th.
Yeah. What we're going to do is, right, I knew Darren for a year or two as part of the Lancat research panel. He's been very kind. He's supported us from pretty much the get-go. I think he was one of the first, 30 or 40 people on the list all those years ago. And I got to know Darren via email and via Twitter. And then various phone conversations. But I then met him at the Nucleus conference at the Belfry, I think, that would have been 3 years ago or so. Yeah. And Darren described Darren described himself to me in one word. And I'm gonna put it to the live chat and see if any of you can guess what that word is, and we'll maybe come back to it later. There's a wee bit of a delay on the chat and the video, Darren, so don't worry if people seem like they're taking a bit of time to make their decision there. But listen, thanks to everybody for joining in this week. Dave says I can't see him. I can see Darren. Can everybody see?
That's probably for the best, frankly.
David McCabe has the clearly the attractiveness filter on his internet browser, and Darren has just broken it. So there we go. Listen, usual Lancat chat at the start of this session. Thanks to everybody for joining in. If you're watching us on some sort of distracted.
I'm going to keep laughing because of the comments that I'm seeing. I need to turn these comments off, otherwise I'm just going to keep laughing.
Yeah. Usual chat. The live chat's open, as many of you have found out already. So if you've got any questions for Darren or indeed myself, then do feel free to chip in. Some people occasionally have audio and video issues. I mean, we all have our issues, but some of them can relate specifically to audio and video buffering. I'm going to put the link in the chat that if you are indeed finding that the audio and the video slightly out of sync, that might just be me, of course, because I am from Fife, and some people have that little delay going on in the brain between things that come out my mouth and common sense. So if you click on that link, then that should sort out your buffering. If you want to see the Lancat archive, you can go into YouTube and have a look at one of our many videos. You might indeed be looking at YouTube right now, the curious form of time travel, and might not be watching this live, in which case a very warm welcome to you too. But first of all, we're going to go over to Mr. Cooke and say, hello, Darren, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Steve. I'm not too bad at all, considering the circumstances we all find ourselves in. How are you?
Do you know what? It's been a bit of a rubbish one last night. I mean, we don't want to get into my private life on HomeGames, but I think one thing that we have in common, mate, is that we both have quite a lot of kids. Is that right? Have you got 3 or 4? Yeah, you've got 4 kids and I've got 4 kids, which makes us a combined Boris, I think, if you add both of us together.
No, we actually admit to ours.
Yeah. At least most of them anyway. Yeah, and last night we had, so we've got a little girl called Eva who's about to turn 1 next Thursday.
Yes, of course, yes.
And she's just not really settling very quickly at night. So I was in with her for a couple of hours, and then my little girl Amelie is 5.5, which she's very keen to. Everybody knows that she's 5.5. She's not 5. She came in to me at something like 4:30, 4:45, saying she's having nightmares. She's been having lots of nightmares about bears. I think we talked about this on a previous home game. So I am, as they say up here, knackered. But your general effervescence and joie de vivre is going to get me through the next 40 minutes, mate.
No pressure then.
No pressure at all. Listen, nobody has participated on the sidebar with trying to guess the one word that Darren used to describe himself. Do you want to solve the mystery and tell everyone how you described yourself?
I introduced myself to you as that I'm just a gobshite from Derbyshire.
Yeah, just a gobshite, and you've used that since. But Darren, you're known for being a bit of a personality. You're known for being a bit of a personality in the sector, and us Northerners, whether it's the north of England or way up in Scotland, we are known for being a bit dour, a bit dour, and a bit robust with our opinions. But you are one of the nicest people that I've had the pleasure of dealing with in financial planning and
Thank you very much.
Services. There's Nick Lincoln saying that self-awareness is a strength. It is indeed, mate. It is indeed. You kind of use the word gobshite in a kind of affectionate term, I think, and you're not shy of putting your opinions forward. And I think the reason many people who are tuning in today will know you and those in the wider sector will be some of the work you've done to combat scams within financial services, which is what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into all that, I want to find out a little bit more about your history in financial services and financial planning, because it goes back a couple of decades now, doesn't it? So tell us a story about wee Darren.
Darren. So I first came into financial services 28 and a half years ago, with a life insurance business. We were direct sales for a life insurance business called Laurentian Life, which no longer exists. Anybody who remembers that name has clearly been around a very long time. Hasn't existed for many, many years. I was there for a couple of years, and that was essentially selling protection business. They had a pensions and investments arm, but it was essentially selling protection policies, is what we did. After a couple of years there, I responded to an advert in that my then wife had seen, I believe, in the Daily Express. We were not express readers, I hasten to add. It was lying around in her canteen at work, for Midland Bank. And I subsequently joined Midland Bank as a financial advisor, and was there for 18 and a half years. So I was bank assurance for a very long time, number of roles there. Worked in sort of the direct sales tied side, selling protection, pensions, investments with them. There it was more pensions, investments. And then I had a brief spell in sales management with them, and then moved into being an IFA. I was actually an IFA with them. And we were, I would say, properly independent. We had a white list. We had a central research team, so we didn't actually do our own product research as such. There was a central research team, but they did research thoroughly that whitelist from the whole of the market. And for a long time, any HSBC product to get onto that list had to be as good as, if not better than, anything else in the market. So actually there was very little HSBC product on it for a long time. That changed towards the end, and it more or less did move to the situation where an HSBC product would be on just because it would be. But we were IFAs, and I was an IFA there for a long time until I finally left. Handed my notice in on the 2nd of December 2011, as they were moving to being a restricted proposition. And I didn't want to be restricted, because I'd seen that. I'd had that door held ajar, and I'd seen the big wide world of being an IFA. So I decided the best place for me was no longer to be with HSBC, and I took that big leap into the big wide yonder to move outside HSBC, and sort of wanted to continue to be an IFA.
And is that the origin of Red Circle then? Was that you going out on your own?
Yeah, I initially joined a network. I joined Positive Solutions, and I think that was probably the right thing for me to do at that point, because obviously I'd always had that arm around my shoulder with HSBC, doing a lot of the function for me, and just really allowed me to get on with the business of seeing clients and selling to clients as we were there to do. You know, we have to, it's kind of an embarrassing word to use these days, I suppose, for a lot of people, but hey, that's where a lot of us started our careers. So I joined Positive Solutions initially with the idea of working with another firm. That didn't last very long. That relationship broke down pretty quickly because I'd already started to want to work in a different way with clients, in a planning relationship with clients, in a more collaborative relationship with clients rather than just selling them a product. And they were very much old school, sell them a product and charge them some money and walk away, and then see them once a year, charge them some money every year to turn up and say your funds are doing fine and walk away again. So that really wasn't what I wanted to do. So that relationship didn't last very long. Sorry, I keep getting distracted by the chat. Is there a way I can turn this off? Otherwise, I'm just going to keep getting distracted. There we go. That's got rid of it. I'm going to keep getting distracted. So, folks, you can insult me all you like now because I can no longer see it.
I'll keep reading them out.
I can't. Just pass all the insults along, Steve. So, and that's when Red Circle was started. So Red Circle is just over 7 years old. Red Circle was formed on the 1st of July that year, 2013. So I started my career, as you like, outside HSBC just as RDR came in, and I was box fresh into RDR and into fees. So I had I had the advantage of having no legacy stuff really sitting around, and I was starting from a clean sheet of paper on a fees basis as an IFA working within Positive Solutions.
Yeah.
10 years later went DA.
One of the first of all, if I was a remotely competent host, right, what I would have said at the outset is that this interview is part of a series of four thematically linked interviews with members of the advice profession. Yeah. So last week we had Adrian Murphy on from Murphy Wealth. Next week we've got Gary Hale on, who's on the live chat today. Hey Gary. And then the week after we're speaking to Catherine Knowles from Cura as well. And of course we've spoken to a number of advice professionals as well up until today. But one thing that kind of links not just HomeGames, but indeed all the chats that we have with financial advisors and paraplanners and planners is this notion of a kind of a wholesale movement within the sector from, I mean, we all know the good old days or the bad old days indeed of flogging products, and that still goes on to varying degrees. But in terms of
sadly
those who define themselves as independent planners or financial planners or however you want to badge all this up, there has been a movement towards the behavioral coaching and well-being and the interrelationships between you and your clients. Can you kind of, from your perspective, Darren, because it's easy for, I mean, I'm a gobshite as well, as you know, it's easy for, a Scottish numpty sitting on the outside of the sector here, kind of the outside looking in, to draw my conclusions about where things are going. But do you get a sense of when that started to happen within the sector for you? Was it a feeling within yourself at HSBC? Or was it, was it the RDR and all the wider chat going on then, or did it predate that?
As an actual awareness of it, really only after I left HSBC. And again, like I say, I'd kind of looked under the lid with being an IFA with HSBC, and I was fortunate in my particular region. We had a sales manager who previously worked outside and worked in IFA businesses and come into HSBC, and he encouraged us in my team to go out to IFA events. So I went to Money Marketing Interactive and events like that, Money Marketing Live, I think it was called then, back in the sort of late or mid 2000s. And so we were mixing and going out and seeing other IFAs and sitting in some of those seminars. And some of it was technical stuff, some of it was product stuff back then, of course, but occasionally you get that little bit of planning stuff, and it started to awaken that grey matter a little bit. But it was only really when I left HSBC and started thinking about the way I wanted to deal with clients, and came across, as many people on here will have done, Paul Armson's videos that he would post out online and some of his teachings, shall we say, and from that expanded into what other people were talking about with financial planning, that really started to make it a more formal process in terms of financial planning. some extent, it was something I'd done forever. I'm a nosy bastard, so I've always been interested in people. So the way I used to sell product when we were selling product was I would sit down and I would talk to the person. My first job out of university was in pharmaceutical sales, and I forget the acronym now, but the sales process that we were taught was to talk to the person, uncover their need, and then show them how your product solved their need. That's not really financial planning, but it's kind of has that kernel of it, of talking to the person and understanding them and their problems, and then showing them how you can solve their problems. Well, to an extent, that's what financial planning is. And I used to sit there when I worked for HSBC. My first job, I was working at Victory Road branch in Derby, right opposite the Rolls-Royce offices in Derby. So most of my clients, or most of the people, would come and see me work for Rolls-Royce. And this was at a time when Rolls-Royce was making, as it seems to be permanently, fairly large-scale redundancies. These were voluntary redundancies at that point, but a lot of people being made redundant. And I would have people coming to me with their terms of redundancy saying, can I afford to retire? Well, that's fairly classic financial planning territory, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I would be sitting down with them and looking at, because I could go to their bank obviously working at a bank, I could get their bank statement, so I could get all their income and expenditure information from the bank systems. And I say, well, these are your direct debits. This is what you spend money on. This is what you're going to need to live on. What is this about right, do you think? Is this kind of what you spend your money on every month? And obviously we have a bit of a conversation, because not everything would be on direct debit necessarily, but you'd have a conversation about what their expenses were and therefore what income they'd need to meet it. And you can tell them what their pension was going to be from Rolls-Royce every month and do the tax calculation on that to tell them this is what you're actually going to receive net every month. Because they'd be looking at it thinking it was a lot less, and actually by the time you took off the fact that you ain't paying a pension anymore, you ain't paying national insurance anymore, and you're going to pay less in tax, actually net position, you might be all right. And then they'd have a lump sum to invest. And I'd draw all this out on a piece of paper and have the blocks like we do now on a cash flow plan. I would say, you'll get your state pension then, and you can have your Rolls-Royce pension, and you've got this money to invest, and that's the income you're going to need, and you're going to be all right. And I'd literally draw it out on an A4 piece of paper and effectively draw a cash flow plan on an A4 piece of paper for them. So when I think back to that's what I was doing in 94, 95, 96, moved away from it a bit actually to an extent later and then came full circle and came back to it in obviously a more formal way and a more aware way, and obviously with much more technology. So that actually that little piece of paper that I used to draw out is now on a computer screen and on a big screen TV that I have just over here in the office, and it's all nice coloured blocks on a computer screen, but essentially it's the same thing.
Yeah. So what's coming through quite clearly here, Darren, is you're obviously a very inquisitive person and you care about people and get to the bottom of their story. Let's use that as a seamless link to why we're here today, and that's to talk chiefly about your involvement and your God, I hate using this word in the context of financial services, but your passion for trying to debunk and get to the bottom of and try and shut down some nefarious behaviour that goes on within the sector. So I think if I googled you actually yesterday as part of my prep. Believe it or not, people prep goes into these sessions, and the thing that comes through on various news articles and stuff you've commented on is all the work that you've done, particularly on the cold calling ban, which I'm sure some people, probably most people who are tuning in to this will know you from and know your involvement. But do you want to give a little bit of background as to what got you out of bed to get involved in this? What was the origin? What's the history of that? Okay,
so back in 2016, all short 4.5 years or so ago, we'd all seen a number of articles in the press about various scams. Store First was one that sprang to mind, but a number of different scams that were hitting the press around that time, most of which, when you looked at it, it was cold calling was underneath it. Okay, so there was that general awareness about cold calling and investment scams being linked. And then in 2016, spring of 2016, there was a Panorama documentary about a particular cold calling centre. And I think at the present time, we still have to put scam in inverted commas because I don't think it's actually been officially recognised as a scam yet. And I think they can probably pay for slightly more expensive lawyers than I can, called the Resort Group. And it was based on Pride Park in Derby, which is all of 15 miles down the road. And I used to walk past it when I worked at HSBC, and I was based on Pride Park in Derby. I would literally walk past or within 100 yards of their office and never knew it existed, only a couple of years earlier. And I sat and watched that documentary and just felt that something needed to be done. Somebody was going to have to stand up. And the obvious answer to me was, we got to stop cold calling. If we can stop the cold calling, it won't solve the scams problem, but it certainly is going to go a long way towards it. Because there is a reason that scammers use cold calling. It's because it's successful. You know, these are not stupid people. These are very astute businessmen most of the time. And cold calling costs a lot of money. It's not a cheap thing to do. So the only reason they're doing it is because it's the most successful way of them scamming people out of their money. Mm. If there was a better way of doing it or a cheaper way of doing it, they'd already be doing that.
Yeah.
So cold calling has to be there for a reason. If we can stop them using cold calling, that's hopefully will reduce the number of people getting scammed. That was the rationale behind it. So I thought, if somebody's got to do something, and if no bugger else is going to do it, I will. Simple as that. And I just thought, I'll do it. I'll set up one of these House of Commons petitions, because they were quite popular at the time. I'll set up one of these House of Commons petitions. I'll speak to a couple of journalists that I knew in financial press, and I'll put it out on Twitter and Facebook, and that'll be it. It'll just run. It'll go viral, in my naivety. It'll just run, and that'll be it. And we'll get 10,000 signatures, because why wouldn't we? Because everybody will sign this, and then the government's got to do something about it. And that's my naivety. That's what I did. It didn't quite work out like that, of course, but that was how it kicked off. I had to approach. You had to get 5 sponsors, so I punted out to 5 people. And forgive me if I forget any of the 5 who sponsored me. So Scott from Rowley Turton, Scott Gallagher from Rowley Turton, Chris Dames. Al Rush was one of the names that sponsored it. Phil Bray, and then I forget who the 6th was. It was Adam from Next Gen or Martin Bamford. I think it was Martin actually was the 6th signature. I know I asked 6 or 7 people and all said yes. It was literally a case of it was the first 5 that logged on and signed it were the 5 that put their names to it. Not that the others wouldn't have done. It's just that they weren't fastest finger first, sort of thing.
Yeah. So you've said that it didn't quite, it didn't go viral in the way that you were hoping to, and it was quite a slow moving thing. Obviously, set against the fact that you're not going to find people who disagree with what you're trying to do. It's obviously had well-meaning intentions. Obviously, we all want people to not be scammed out of their hard-earned money, and potentially vulnerable people and what have you. But why do you think it didn't gather the momentum? Is it just
initially it did. Initially we got we were. Well, I felt it did. I was looking at those numbers. I'm quite obsessed with logging on and looking at the numbers and the graph, and as you did, and saw the numbers racing up. And New Model Advisor fairly kindly ran a piece quite early, and I think most of the trade press, within a couple of days, we'd had a piece in the trade press about this article going up, and on the online versions of the articles, they were putting a link to the petition for people to very easily just click in, and we were up to 1,000 and 2,000 fairly quickly. We were going up sort of 750, 1,000 signatures a week, and we were up to 4,000 or 5,000 within a month, and then it started to stall a bit. And at this point, I was still having to be involved. I was still having to promote it on Twitter. I was still talking to the magazine people about it and trying to get pieces in press, and it had been in a couple of the mainstream press as well. And it's slightly disappointing that we weren't getting more numbers for the publicity it was generating, I have to say. And then 2 things happened in relatively close succession. I'd made no approaches whatsoever other than I'd kind of tweeted Paul Lewis and said, would you tweet this on? And he turned around and said, sorry, no matter how much I might agree or disagree with what you're doing, I have a policy of not tweeting any petitions or anything of this nature, because once I do one, I have to do them all.
Yeah.
I absolutely respect him for that. I have no problem with that position whatsoever. He just doesn't do any of it. Fine, I understand. And I'd approached a couple of other people like Martin Lewis and got nowhere. But I hadn't really gone through the line of approaching any of the life companies and asking them to support it. And then I was driving along, and I got a phone call. It was my my broker rep with Royal London, and she contacted me and said, "This petition thing that you're doing, Darren. I was at our conference yesterday and spoke to Steve Webb, and he'd like to speak to you about it. Is it all right if he gives you a call?" Bloody right it is. It was actually, sadly, Steve then had some personal issues to deal with. So it was probably about a week later he actually rang me and he apologised profusely for not doing it quicker. And when I understood his personal issues, it was like, mate, if you'd been another month, I could have understood, you know. And we had a little chat, and he said, look, I'm going to have to get this cleared through our compliance and etc. people, but it's something I think we should be supporting at Royal London. Phil had already been speaking to, Phil Bray was still involved with Sense at that point, and they were quite keen to come on board and be somebody supporting it. And I think out of the blue, Zurich contacted me as well. So it was kind of a race for who was going to announce first. So I think officially Royal London were the first provider to say, we support this. And Sense were the first network to say it, but from there again it just snowballed again, that we started to get all the other life companies saying yes, we're supporting it. Zurich quite quickly announced after Royal London, and then others announced, and the journalists were chasing other providers saying, "Are you supporting this?" And of course they were sitting there saying, "Yeah." So within a day, another half a dozen had said yes, we're supporting it, and Simply Biz supported it, and other networks came out and supported it, like Intrinsic Quilters. I think they were still Intrinsic at the time, or Mutual, Standard Life, Scottish Widows, and just suddenly everybody was supporting it. And Steve was also in the background talking to the ABI, and they came on board and said, yes, we support it, and pension-wise, and just suddenly everybody was supporting it. So clearly Steve coming on board was a massive momentum shift.
Yeah.
But again, didn't actually shift the numbers of signatures dramatically. And we were still needing to get to that 10,000 signatures in order to get the government to actually speak to us and do anything about it, really. So we thought. And then out of the blue, I still remember I was sat at my son's football training just up the road, and looking at Twitter. I was walking around the pitch side while he was doing his football training, and a good friend of mine, I'm not sure if he's on the chat or not, Victor Sachs, one of my friends from HSBC, tweeted or sent me a Twitter message to say, I've just tweeted Martin Lewis about your campaign, Darren. I thought, well, I've already tried that, got nowhere.
Yeah.
And he's replied, shit, this is big. And about 5 minutes later, Martin Lewis tweeted that he was supporting this, and here was a link. And I was sat at that football game, that hour, just watching the number of signatures go bang, 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 bang. And I think within an hour, we had another 2,000 signatures just off that one tweet from Martin Lewis. It was the numbers just rocketed up.
So this is there's an element of this that's it's you know, in Darren Cooke the movie, right? Let's imagine there's a movie of your life. This is a nice wee chapter, right, where you know, a wee gobshite from
Tom Cruise isn't playing me; he's too short.
Yeah, let's not go there. So there's a lovely wee chapter there about all the work that you've done, and it's a great story, and obviously it goes without saying, and you don't need me to say it, but more power to you. I think it's a phenomenal effort. But there's a subtext to this that I'm sure a number of people who are tuning in are saying, is that why did it take, you know, someone to get the grit between their teeth, or the bit between their teeth, sorry, and drive this forward? Why do we not have structurally, you know, cross-party, whether it's asset managers, the regulator, providers, and, you know, members of the advice community and professions all working together to stop this happening? What is it? Because you know, scams and criminal behavior, it's like fucking whack-a-mole, isn't it? Because you shut that down and something else pops up. And we talked a couple of days ago about, mini bond providers popping up, and we all know the stories behind those, and unregulated investments and companies promising the earth in terms of investment returns. What is the dysfunction within the sector that is allowing that to perpetuate?
Some of that is apathy from across the sector, just a general apathy across the sector, which is sad to see. And really, that was the difference with me, that I was angry enough to do something about it. I never expected it to take off and take the direction it did. As I say, and the infamy that I've garnered because of it was completely by accident. Never expected any of that. I just expected to start this little online petition, kick it off, and walk away and get back to doing the day job. The initial effort and it did become a bit of an obsession over those few months, because it started in September and we got the announcement in November by Philip Hammond stood up in November and said, we're going to do it, and by that stage we were still only 8,000 signatures actually. So, but obviously there was a lot of other pressure coming from other areas, and actually it just became a bit of a rallying point for advisors to get behind, but more particularly all the life companies, networks, etc., PFS, IFP as it was back then. I think they were still the IFP at that point, 2016, to come behind and actually say, yeah, we need to do this. So really, I just lit that spark. But I think generally, it's actually anything in our industry is like trying to herd cats or round up chickens. We all want to run off and do something different. We've all got day jobs. We're all doing something for ourselves, and actually getting somebody and getting agreement to sit and do something like that is quite difficult. Everybody's got a different idea about how this industry should be run. And then obviously on top of that is when people have actually tried to do stuff and have actually tried to report scams to the regulator or action for, on the face of it, very often, bugger all gets done.
Yeah, we just had a comment actually in from Michelle Cracker. Hey Michelle, how are you doing? Thanks for tuning in.
Michelle was one of the people who came on board and supported. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, nice one, Michelle. So Michelle's saying it's difficult, stroke impossible to define pension scams. Many of them, most of them, in fact, these days are not illegal. It's therefore extremely difficult to put in legislation to stop it.
Yeah, she's absolutely correct on that. It is actually the scammers have evolved as they do and moved. Obviously, cold calling doesn't happen anymore, or shouldn't happen anymore. And if it is, again, the whole point of the campaign, we knew we wouldn't necessarily stop cold calling. We knew we wouldn't stop scams, but the whole point really was that end game that, and I said it a number of times in interviews and so forth over time, that if we could move to the point that became legislation as it did in January last year, that we can say to the public, if you receive a phone call, a cold call, and that person is asking you about pensions, that person making that call is already a criminal. They are already prepared to break the law. Why are you still talking to them? Because let's be honest, if you are talking to a criminal, it probably ain't going to end very well for you and your money. And that's the message we want to get across. And I said a number of times, and if that stops one person, if one person gets that message and doesn't answer the phone to a cold caller, or puts the phone down on a cold call scammer, we've been successful. I'd like to think we've saved more than one person from that. But if we save one person. If one person, as a result of that campaign, read a piece in the press and put the phone down on a cold call scammer, then surely that's a measure of success.
Yeah, and we talked a couple of days ago, Darren, about the potential matrix or different kind of levels of inappropriate. Let's just call it inappropriate investments, because there can be stuff that's obviously perfectly legitimate and legal on the face of it, but would not be in anybody's interest based on their current situation and health and wealth and what have you to invest in. Let's look at this issue let's flip the perspective on its head and touch on what you were saying there. How do we give people that first line of defense, or that savvy to be able to filter out to be able to look at an advert or look at Facebook ads, like a number of people are mentioning there, or even on TikTok, we've seen recently a lot of shit put on TikTok as well. How do you make sure that there's that filter so that people are educated enough to go direct if they want to go direct, or who seek advice if it's more appropriate?
That's really difficult, clearly. As we've said, I've got 28 years in this now. And many of the people who are on the chat there will have had, a very long experience in financial services. And most of us would think that we can spot a scam a mile off. There's actually been one posted on a Facebook group this morning. And actually, on the face of it, it's very professional. There's been one recently from Prudential. This one's Fidelity. Apparently, the paperwork looks extremely professional, very copycat to Fidelity style and Fidelity logos, etc., all over it. And it's only promising 2.75% guaranteed a year, which isn't that outstanding. But it's attractive if you're only getting 0.075% in a bank. 2.75 looks good. But it also doesn't look that outlandish that it's straight away you're going to say that can't be real, particularly when all the paperwork looks good. Now, Fidelity don't have that product. Clearly, it is a scam. And it's only because we're experienced in the industry that we can look at that paperwork and pick out maybe a couple of things that don't look quite right in it, or we can say Fidelity don't offer that product, or Fidelity wouldn't offer that product, that we can actually say it's a scam. To a member of the public, that's going to be almost impossible to spot. Really is going to be almost impossible to spot. So some of the stuff should be fairly straightforward. Let's be honest. Some of these mini bonds that are offering you 8, 9, 10, 12% and more, anybody with a modicum of intelligence, really, you would think should be able to spot that that's a scam if they just sit and step back for 30 seconds and realize that actually, how are they going to generate that level of return? If you also understand some of the structure of how some of these scams actually operate, you can start to appreciate that actually they don't need an 8% return to pay me my 8%. They've actually just been making 20% return on the money, because by the time they've paid 25% off to the marketing company, and my 10 grand is now only 7.5 that's left to invest and make the 8%. So actually that's now an over 10% return they've got to make. And then of course they've got to cover their costs and fees of running the investments as well. So you can have a couple of 3% on top for that. And they want to make some money on top. So even if it's a legitimate investment, it's probably got to be making 20 just to pay me my 8%. And then it's got to return my capital. Just do the maths.
Yeah.
But all we can do is continue to educate the public as much as we possibly can and continue to make people aware that if you're seeing these types of rates, they're just not legitimate.
Yeah, we've just had a really interesting comment actually from Neil Bage, and we wouldn't expect anything less from Mr. Bage. Hey Neil, thanks for tuning in. I think we have a duty of care to help people understand about themselves and recognise and accept that they are scammable.
Yeah.
I get that everyone is, but the greater the self-awareness, the more we can help people help themselves. It's not the solution, but maybe part of it, and I think that's a great comment.
We've seen studies, haven't we, that say that people think they can't be scammed, and then they'll take a fairly, they'll go through an online questionnaire or quiz or a survey or something like that, and even people say, "Oh no, I could never be scammed," and probably about 50% of them actually then fall for the scam. Because actually, this is I'm preaching to the guru around the bias of overconfidence. People think because you think you can't be scammed, actually sometimes you can leave yourself more open to being scammed because you think, "Oh, I'm brilliant, I can spot a scam a mile off." Actually, no, you can't, mate. And that confidence that you can spot a scam actually makes you more likely to be scammed. Neil is no doubt, as we speak, correcting my behavioural bias interpretations there.
Yeah, and here's another question for you, Darren. So the clients that then come to you for financial planning are clearly the traits and demographics or whatever is the panacea for our sector, that we want people to recognise the importance and the value of advice. What defines their characteristics, and what is it that makes them come to you? Is there any insight we can glean from the people that you deal with to somehow spread that knowledge and that aptitude across the wider demographics?
I suspect, like most of the people, most of the advisors that are in the chat there, in the room, so to speak, the virtual room. My typical client, because most of my clients now come by referral, either from existing clients, so it's a client that's experienced what I do, that's saying to their friends, family, relations, work colleagues, this is what Darren's done for us. Why don't you go and talk to Darren? So they kind of know what they're getting in for. They know that they're not going to be sold a pension. They're not going to be sold an ISA. They're coming to have financial planning and help with structuring their finances to deliver the outcomes that they want for themselves and their family and their life. So typically my clients are coming through the door expecting financial planning. Typically they're going to be in their 50s or 60s and typically looking at imminently or in the near future retirement. Other than that, I then get a younger generation through, which is generally the children of existing clients. So my clients who are in their 60s and 70s might well be referring their 30s and 40-year-old children, either because they're gifting them some money or because they can see that the benefits that of saving into a pension and making savings and investments has done for them over their lifetime, and they want the same experience and benefits to their children.
Yeah, I do sometimes worry that word of mouth thing, which is obviously a wonderful, an accolade for the sector, and we find that in our own research, Darren, when we talk about where the new clients come from, and that we hear so much that is word of mouth and friends and family and intergenerational stuff, and that's amazing, because that's a great reflection on the quality of stuff that all you ladies and gents in planning are doing. But how do we get that message out there into the wider the wider sector?
That is a problem. That is a problem, because the press, the fourth estate, as Mr. Nick Lincoln, who's on the chat there, refers to them, they love the bad news, don't they? They love to report when advice has gone wrong, when we've had a rogue advisor that's not given good advice to people and scammed people deliberately or inadvertently. They love to report that. They're not so good at reporting the good news stories and the wonderful stories that we all have of how we've helped clients achieve more from life, achieve more for themselves and their families, and created better health, better mental health, better life for them through good financial planning. I'm sure many people, it went a bit viral this weekend, saw the IFW published a piece by Ken Bendel last week about a real client experience that Kim knew of with a lady supporting the RNLI, and that was a phenomenal story. And Alan Smith did a call to arms and said, why are we not putting these stories out there? Everybody, you've got these stories, write these stories, put them in blogs, put them on LinkedIn, put them on Twitter, put them anywhere. But write these good news stories and let's get them out there somewhere.
I saw that.
Public.
I saw that, Darren, and I read.
We've got to get these stories out there, and if the press ain't going to do it for us, then God knows we've got the ability to do it ourselves through social media platforms, through blogs, through writing a column in your local newspaper. God knows what. Just get that story out there. Get those good news stories out there about how financial planning changes people's lives for the better.
Yeah, and I sent Alan Smith a message last night, actually, because it's the first time I'd read his blog, so I understand he wrote it a year ago.
I remember reading this at the time. Fantastic story.
It's an incredible piece of writing, and I sent him a wee message afterwards, and I wholeheartedly agree with all of that, Darren. We've got about 2 minutes left, and I just want to end by asking you one final thing. And a lot of what stories, not spreadsheets, is what Gary Hale said. That is the hashtag if you want to check that out on the Twitter. A lot of what we've touched on in terms of scams and stuff does prey on emotional responses and potentially vulnerable clients. And here's a seamless link for you, Darren. As we move into a new age of ESG investing,
yes,
this is the next or one of the next potential targets for fraudulent behaviour, to target people's ethics and personal beliefs.
Yes, it could well be. Could well be. We've seen it in the past to an extent with, you know, some of the green oil bonds and that were around, some of the scams that were for investing in green oil and tea plantations and God knows what else. So that's already been used a bit. I mean, the most common thing that underlies a scam is usually some sort of connection to property and property development, or investing in property and leisure complexes, hotels in Cape Verde and stuff like that is quite a common underpin to scam, because obviously there is that general perception, specifically in the UK, that property is a wonderful investment. That fallacy that property is a wonderful investment, and the only way to get rich is property. But yeah, we've seen that coming already, and it's very easy to play on that behavioural bias and that question mark about, wouldn't you like to do something that's good for the environment and good for your fellow man?
Exactly.
And that's something we're going to have to start to ask clients, but it's going to be, of course, clients are going to say yes to that. You know, if you say to a client, would you like to invest your money in a way that's good for the environment and has social governance at its core? Well, what client's going to sit there and say, no, I'm a heartless bastard and I don't give a shit? Of course they're going to say yes, because the behavioural pressure, societal pressure, peer pressure is the behavioural bias, is going to force them to say yes, because they want to look like they're nice, caring people. And therefore they're going to end up being sold an ESG investment, whether that's actually what they want or not. Or they might be more likely to be sold a scam investment that's an ESG investment, whether that's really what they want or not, because they want to look and feel cuddly and warm inside.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that you know, is niggling away in this subject matter. And I did have a ulterior motive in asking you that, because I know it provokes a reaction in you. But also,
it gets the gobshite out in me, mate. That's why.
And it's also a link into the next Lancat big project that we're going to be working on, and we're going to bring our own angle to that. Which, watch out for that at the end of the year and as we go into 2021. Listen, Darren, we have shot our 45 minutes. The last thing that remains to be said to yourself is thank you for your time. A remarkable amount of people have stayed on for the full duration, actually, about 90% of you. You've obviously got a lot of fans in the chat. Which is,
what's really happened is people have gone off to the toilet, or they've gone to make a cup of tea and they just forgot to log off.
Caught sight of you and fainted and swooned, obviously. But listen, thank you. More power to you. Well done for all the stuff that you've done. You know, you might be a gobshite, but you're definitely our gobshite. So thank you very much for that,
Steve. Thank you, and again, you know, thank you to the Lancat. I really enjoy the work you do, and I think you put some good work out there into the sector. A lot of which is put out there for free. Obviously, you have to make a living, you have to run a business, but you do a lot of stuff that comes back out to us as advisors at minimal or no cost at all. And also the work that you do, if you just sit up a little bit so we can see that T-shirt, you're intimate. We're not having any heavy rock, thrash metal, death metal T-shirts today. We've got a T-shirt that actually means something today.
The last thing
that is positive for people.
The very last thing I was going to say is that T-shirt of the week is the Samaritans this week. As I often wear the Samaritans T-shirt. We're not asking you to donate any money. You know, we don't ask for money for these sessions. Why would we? Because but you know, next time
listen to me.
Next time you're passing a tin, you know, maybe think of us and put in a couple of quid. But on a wider note, we are facing into potentially one of the most difficult winters that we've had for many a year for various reasons. I'm very, very lucky with where I'm in my life, but I didn't feel all that lucky 7 or 8 years ago, which is why I talk quite a lot about mental health in whatever platform I'm given by how lucky I am to work for the Lancat. It could be a very difficult few months for lots of people. So we talk about, you know, men in particular need to open up and need to talk to each other, but maybe we could start by listening to each other as well. It would cost nothing to check in on your mates and family over the next few months. Ask them if they're doing all right. You never know. A bit like what Darren's done with the work on scams. You never know who you're going to help. So I'd like to leave you with that message. Check in next week when we'll have Gary Hale, who will be interviewed, I think, by the boss. Mr. Polson's going to be back for next week. So thank you very much for taking part, and Lancat out. See you later.
See you later, folks. Thank you. Bye.